Woe unto him who recognizes another politics but that which holds the laws of right as holy. Immanuel Kant. In my last two lectures, I introduced public right, as Kant would call it, because he says that what is right in general is determined by reason. The right deals with the mine and yours, so with property. There is that which is mine by birth. There's my innate rights, for example, to my own body and its autonomy. And there is acquired rights, because there's that which is mine, but because I acquired it, like my house. And the right deals with exactly that. And justice means that everyone has what is his, and what is his is not touched by others. He is not harmed. But while this is determined by reason, and according to Kant, is valid even in the state of nature, so when there is no state, when there is no laws, of course, in the state of nature, there is no guarantee that others will respect my rights, that others will leave what is mine to me and accept that it is mine and not theirs. So, therefore, the state of nature is a state of permanent threat, of permanent, at least potential war, because there can always be conflicts about the mine and yours, about whether I have a right to this object or maybe someone else has a right to that object. And these conflicts can only be resolved through war in the state of nature, which is exactly why private right, that is the right in the state of nature, the right according to reason, is not enough. We need to come together to leave the state of nature to erect a public right, where it is publicly declared through laws what rights people have, what object belongs to whom, and these rights are guaranteed and enforced. And I also talked about in the previous lecture how we know what is just, how we know which kinds of public laws are just. We have to go by the idea of the original social contract, and we have to ask ourselves, a given law, is that a law that everyone could potentially agree to? Which we can test through what Kant calls the maxim of publicity. That is, we can ask ourselves, does this work if it's publicly declared? Or would publicly declaring a certain maxim defeat that maxim, in which case it is not just? This I discussed in my previous lectures. And now it is time to get further into the public right. The public right, as I also already mentioned, has three levels. There's the state right, that is the right in one state. There's the nation's right, the right between states. And then there's the cosmopolitan right, which maybe you could, in modern terms, say is the human right as such. And I want to talk about all of those, starting with this lecture and going on for several more lectures. And to start off, I want to make clear that Kant, that's what he states himself, that Kant has developed a metaphysical doctrine of states' right. Now, this is something that even in his own time led to some irritation or some criticism from some people, and is bound to lead to even more irritation in our time, where metaphysics is completely rejected because our time is a time of rationalism. It's a time that doesn't believe in reason, which is declared to be the most rational position for some reason, to reject rationality. Now, why would that lead to irritation? Well, metaphysics, and I gave an earlier lecture already about what is metaphysics to Kant, but to put it simply, metaphysics is supposed to be the science of the supersensual, right? So it is a science that is not empirical, that is not based on experience, but rather where we simply employ our reason. So we come to cognitions a priori, that is before, independently of any sort of experience. Now, this might be fine when we are dealing with metaphysics in the more narrow sense, with theoretical metaphysics that asks about God, about the immortality of the soul, about freedom. Those are the three main ideas of metaphysics according to Kant. Because here it's clear that these are things that we cannot have experience of. We cannot experience God. So if cognition of these objects is possible at all, clearly it must be metaphysical. It must come out of pure reason. Now, whether such cognition is possible, that is exactly the main question of Kant in his main work, in the Critique of Pure Reason. And he comes to the conclusion that it is not possible, that pure reason alone cannot come to any cognition, that we always need some sort of viewing. And since we cannot have any viewing of God or the immortality of the soul or of freedom, no theoretical knowledge of them is possible. But when it comes to the state, people would usually think that the state is something that exists in the sensual world. And it is something that can be experienced. And they would usually think that when you talk about a state and the way a state should be, the way politics should be done, you do need experience of how the world functions. Indeed, often people will claim to know something about human nature from experience, that is, to know how human beings are. And they will use that claim to further claim that certain things in politics, certain things in the state are not possible, right? So when you say there should be world peace, then you will have people claiming that that's just a naive dream, there will never be world peace, war is human nature. Or the same you often hear when communism is discussed, right? You hear people saying, communism can't work because it contradicts human nature. Now, as far as communism is concerned, I'm not a communist. So I do have my own criticisms, very serious criticisms of communism. But this is not among them. This particular criticism is just dumb. If this is something that should be, so if communist society is ideal, is what we should strive for, which again I would disagree with, or if world peace is ideal, is something we should strive for, which I would agree with, then that's that. There's nothing to discuss here further. And if it happens that our nature makes it impossible to ever reach that goal, then that's not an argument against that goal. That's an argument against us, against the value of human beings. And Kant would say, if that was true, then we would not have to throw away the ideal. We would not have to despise the ideal and claim it's only chimerical, but rather we would have to despise ourselves because we cannot live up to that ideal. I mean, imagine someone talks about the ideal circle, which of course is completely round, completely curved. It has no angles at all. And now someone said, oh, but the ideal circle, that contradicts human nature. No person can draw the ideal circle. No one is such secure in his hand and leading the pen or the brush or whatever as to draw a perfect circle. Even if it looks perfect for the human eye, if you were to zoom in and to measure perfectly, you would always find that it is slightly elliptical, that it is not perfectly round. This might be true, but that is not an argument against the thought of the ideal circle. That just means that we as human beings cannot fully realize that ideal, cannot fully live up to it. The point for Kant in a metaphysical doctrine of right, of states right, but also then of international right and so on, of cosmopolitan right, the point for him, what makes it metaphysical, is that he does not start from any empirical insight. So he does not start with the question, well, what is human nature and therefore what can we expect of human beings? Or he does not start from asking, well, how are the states that already exist in the world? And they maybe can only be improved and reformed so much. So what's the best we can get from here? No, he asks, and for that I don't need experience, I only need reason. He asks, what is just? How should a state look like? And once we have that ideal, once we have the ideal state in our mind, then secondly we can ask, okay, can we realize this? But first, we simply have to think of the ideal state. And Kant would say that the ideal state is independent of the nature of its inhabitants, of its citizens. He says at one point that the good, the proper, the rational state could just as well be a state of devils and still function as a state of angels. Because the whole point is that right is only about outer actions. I already gave a lecture about the difference between right and ethics. And in ethics, it's about your own inner attitude. It's about your own goodwill. You are a good person in the ethical sense if you do the right actions because they are the right actions, not for some other reason, right? If you don't kill someone because you truly have reverence for his humanity, then you are a good person. If you don't kill someone, even though you hate him and would love to kill him, but you are afraid of going to jail, then you are not a good person. You are doing the right action, but not for the right reason. Now in ethics, what matters is the goodwill, is that we do something out of the right reason. But in the area of the right, this does not matter. Here it is only about justice, which is only about the outer actions, about respecting what belongs to somebody else, what is his property, not touching his property, not harming him. It doesn't matter why I do this. And the whole point for Kant, again, I explained that in the earlier lecture on ethics and right, the whole point is that right deals with what can be enforced. The goodwill cannot be enforced, but outer actions can be enforced. So even a devil that has an evil will, that wants to cause harm, can be forced to not cause harm, can be forced to do good. Maybe he would like to steal from others, but if there's a functioning police and if there's laws prohibiting stealing, and if he will get punished for stealing, then maybe he won't steal. Maybe he would like to rape, maybe he would like to murder, but again, if the state persecutes and punishes that, then maybe he won't do it. So at least as long as the devil is a somewhat prudent devil, as long as the devil is still ruled by some sort of rational self-interest, right? Because otherwise, of course, that's a bit more difficult. If someone really wants to cause harm and doesn't care about his own benefit, is ready even to die, like someone who goes amok, some school shooters or some terrorists, that might be more complicated. But as long, those are exceptions after all, as long as we are dealing with someone who is still ruled by self-interest, Kant would say we can force him to act good, and even if he is not good. And again, a good state must be a state that would function even if all the citizens were devils. If the state for functioning depends on all the citizens being angels, it's not a well made up state. Because if everyone was an angel, that is, if everyone was morally good, was good in the sense of ethics, then the right, then a state would not even be needed. The state is precisely needed because not everyone is an angel. Even if there may be angels, as long as there are some devils, you need a state to keep them in check. So again, the point for Kant would not be to say, oh no, human nature is good, so humans all want justice, they all want world peace. The point is rather to say, this is about right. It's not about ethics. So we don't depend on people being good. We don't depend on people having the goodwill. Maybe they don't have it. Maybe they never will have it. But all we depend on is their rational self-interest. And based on that, we need to find how we can force them into behaving. So Kant would say that the proper state is like an automaton that keeps itself running and that does not require the goodwill of its citizens. Now, once you know what the ideal state should look like, then of course you can try to realize that ideal. That is, you can try to, since the state doesn't need to be founded, since we are not in the state of nature, since we already have states, you can try to slowly transform the already existing states into the ideal, into the fully just state as it should be. And this, to Kant, is the job of politics. He calls politics the exercising doctrine of right. So the doctrine of right as a science has, in a way, these two fields. There's the metaphysical doctrine of rights, where the philosopher simply asks, what does reason tell us about right, about justice? What does reason say? What laws there should be, how human beings should, or rational beings in general, since again, human nature as such does not factor in how rational beings should live together. But then, along with this metaphysical doctrine of right, there's the exercising or the practicing doctrine of right, that is politics, which tries to work with these results of the metaphysical doctrine of right and to realize them. And of course, here, for politics, as the exercising doctrine of rights, you do need some sort of empirical cognition, some sort of experience. That is, you do need, Kant would say, some anthropological knowledge about human nature. You need to, so to say, know your material, know what you're dealing with, what you're working with. But the point is that this comes second. I mean, imagine you want to go somewhere. Let's say you want to visit the Statue of Liberty in New York. Well, you first need to choose that goal, right? You need to choose your destination. And then second, you can ask yourself, and here you will of course need experience, in this case geographical knowledge. You can ask yourself now, where is the Statue of Liberty? Okay, it's in New York, on the American continent, and where am I? And of course, while the destination might always be the same, like two different people could both say, I want to visit the Statue of Liberty, the way that you have to take might be very different based on where you are, right? Like some person might already be close by, let's say he's already in Boston, so not too far away, so he could take a car or a train, or he could even walk if he wanted to. While I'm here in Berlin, so I would have to fly or have to take a boat. And let's say if planes weren't invented yet, or even boats weren't invented yet, I mean, of course, in that case, there would also likely not be a Statue of Liberty yet. But if boats were not even invented yet, and I knew that I need to cross the Atlantic Ocean, then I would now have to think about how I can get across it, and I would have to maybe invent boats first. But the point is that first I need to know I want to go to the Statue of Liberty. And everything else, right? The experience needed, where is it? Where am I? The further experience may be needed to construct a boat or construct a plane. That comes second. But I first need to know where I even want to go, right? And what I can't do is start from where I am and what means I have at my disposal, and then right away say, oh, it's not possible, right? I'm in Berlin, planes and boats were not invented yet, so I can't go to the Statue of Liberty. Well, with that attitude, I will never go there, for sure. Because with that attitude, I will never invent a boat or a plane. I would have to first say, I want to go across that ocean. That is my goal. And then, second, I can start thinking about how to realize that goal. So the same would be true for right and for politics, Kant would say. We have to start with the ideal, For example, we want a just state where everyone has his property, or we want a just relationship between states where there's peace on earth. And then second, we can ask what politics is needed to get there. But what we should not do is to first start from experience and to say, oh, the world is unjust, some people have lots of properties, some have nothing, or oh, there's so many wars, so nothing can be done about that. The ideal is unrealistic. So Kant is very much an enemy of those people who might think of themselves as very smart, very prudent, who claim that the ideal is unrealistic and cannot be reached. Those people who claim, who will say that we must take men as they are, not as pedants ignorant of the world or good-natured visionaries fancy they ought to be. But in place of that, as they are, it would be better to say what they have made them, stubborn and inclined to revolt, through unjust constraint, through perfidious plots placed in the hands of the government. Obviously, then, if the government allows the reins to relax a little, sad consequences ensue, which verify the prophecy of those supposedly sagacious statesmen. In devising the ideal state, the ideal of justice, one important point to Kant is to point out that the state's right is not the same as the state's prudence. Now, for Kant, and I discussed this already in my lecture on the imperatives, for Kant, the practical, that is everything dealing with human action, the practical can be under two principles. You can either have Eloid theonomy, which means free law giving, and that is the principle of morality, or you can have eudaimonism, eudaimonia being the Greek word for happiness. So that would be the practical principle of self-interest, of doing what is to your own advantage, which in the end always comes down to doing whatever brings you happiness. So those are the two principles, right? You can, in all your actions, you can either do what is right, that is what reason says should be done, or you can do what is prudent, that is what your senses say should be done, and they say do whatever makes you happy, in which case you will use reason simply as an instrument to find out how to best get there, but the goal itself will not be a rational goal. It will be a goal dictated by the senses. And well, this is true when it comes to the actions of the individual. And when I discussed it in previous lectures, especially the one on the imperatives, where I focused on ethics, on moral philosophy, I was focused on the individual. But this is true also when it comes to states, when it comes to politics, Kant would say. Here too, we can do two things. We can either, and then you have the state's right, we can either do in politics what is right, what is just, what reason demands, or we can do a politics that tries to do whatever is to our own advantage, that is at the end of the day whatever brings us, whatever brings this state and its people happiness. And there's an old Latin saying that demands just that says that salus publica suprema lex esto, meaning the welfare of the public, the welfare of the state, or of the people, is the supreme law. And this statement would be the statement of the state's prudence, right? This would be the statement stating that we should go after the happiness, after what benefits the people essentially. And this Kant very clearly rejects. Just like in ethics, Kant's one of the greatest merits of Kant as a practical philosopher is to have very clearly shown that eudaimonism is the wrong principle, that eudaimonism of any sorts, be it for the individual or be it in politics for the state, must be rejected. Of course, nowadays, this is all that matters, right? Nowadays, politicians will very openly say that they are all about eudaimonism. I mean, they will probably not use that word, but in essence, they will say stuff like, what matters is our economy, our economic growth, our welfare, the wealth of the nation, the living standard. They will say stuff like America first. They will very, very directly say that for our welfare, for our way of life, or for our security, it is fine to commit crimes, even to commit genocide. This is what the Israeli politicians say, for example. And a politician who was to say the opposite, who was to say, no, what matters is justice, what matters is what is right, and I'm willing to even sacrifice some of our living standards, some of our luxury, to do what is right, if that is what it takes, would probably be rejected, would probably not get many votes, which only goes to show how evil, how rotten a lot of the voters must be. And Kant would say that the state cannot be about happiness. That would necessarily be a despotic state trying to force the people to be happy. Everyone has a different sort of happiness, so you cannot force someone to become happy according to what your concept of happiness is. No, people need the freedom to seek their own happiness, right? As the American Declaration of Independence says, people need to be able to pursue their happiness, but the state as such is not responsible for making them happy. Vase, Kant says, the state has to take care not of the sensual welfare, but of the intellectual welfare of the people. And by intellectual welfare, Kant understands a condition, not a condition that feels good sensually, but rather a condition that, if I think about it, if I judge it, I will judge to be good, a condition that I will approve of intellectually. And that would be a state with a constitution that secures the rights and the freedom of its people, and that secures its own continued existence as a state securing the rights and freedom. So what is really needed is justice, and the state protecting my rights both inwardly against the other individuals in the state and also against the state's own government, as well as outwardly against other states, other people that might attack the state. And this is the true welfare. So Kant would say, we shouldn't say salus publica suprema lex, but justice, but justitia publica suprema lex. So not the welfare, but the justice of the public is the supreme law. So Kant says that this Latin saying might be accepted if we interpret it in the right way, because Kant would say the true welfare is exactly this intellectual welfare, is exactly the justice. And he also says if that is given, then the sensual welfare will follow. That is, if you have a state with true justice where everyone has his rights, has his property, and is secured in that, and everyone has his freedom, then the happiness of the people will follow more or less on its own. While on the other hand, a state where the rights of the people are somehow violated will also be a state where there won't be universal happiness. And Kant points out that on some level at least, people have a sense that politics should be about more than happiness, it should be about justice. And he points out that not even the worst despot dares to openly proclaim that he is a despot, that is, that he violates the people's rights, but rather he will always claim to stand for what is right. He will always claim that his rule is just, right? We can see that in the nation's right, in what nowadays gets called international law. No one dares to just say, oh yeah, I'm just declaring war on another people, on a neighboring country. I'm just being an aggressor. I just want to conquer. Even if it was for the welfare of his own people, he doesn't dare to say, hey, let's attack another people, this will benefit us. Let's be robbers. Let's pillage. Let's improve our living standard at the cost of other people. No. Even the worst despot will always say, this is just. This is a war that we were forced into. We are just protecting ourselves. I always find it quite noteworthy that even the Nazis did that, because it is against their ideology, right? Their ideology was that there is no universal justice, because there is no universal humanity. Justice doesn't matter. Their ideology was that life is a Darwinian struggle for survival where only the fittest survives anyways, and the races must fight each other, and the inferior races must die out, and the superior races they alone can prevail. And they said that the Germans are a people without space, that the Germans need living space, and therefore we need to conquer space in Ukraine and Belarus. So from that ideology, it would have made perfect sense to say, okay, we are attacking Poland now. And those Slavs, they are all subhumans anyway, so we will just kill them off. But even the Nazis did not dare say that, but rather in a famous speech at the beginning of the Second World War, Hitler said, we are now shooting back, claiming that Poland had attacked at the border, and that in a sense Germany was just defending itself. So this is what Kant points out, that no one dares to openly be unjust, to openly declare that he only cares about his own or his state's, his people's own benefit, but rather everyone will at least pretend that this is about more than your own benefit, that this is about what's right. This is a very important point, one I already and further discussed in my lecture on why to Kant morality is not about the consequences of actions. The point is that very often people will claim that what is good, what our reason tells us should happen, cannot happen because the world, because human beings are bad. But what people leave out is that maybe they are not bad by nature, maybe they are bad because they were made that way. Uh, this reminds me of the insight of Wilhelm Reich, who was a student of Freud. And Freud was more conservative, more pessimistic. Freud recognized that the psychological issues of people that he was trying to heal, the mental health problems, came from the way our society functions and from the way people are raised, the repressive, the authoritarian, the especially sexually repressive way children are raised. Freud recognized that this led to mental illness, but he also tended to believe that this is a necessary price to pay, because without such a restrictive authoritarian society and pedagogy, there would be chaos. The people needed to suppress their drives, even if it led to mental illness. Otherwise, those drives would destroy us. Well, Reich was a student of Freud's, but someone who did say, well, if the insight of psychoanalysis is that mental illness is caused by society, why do we try to just treat mental illness in individuals? Why don't we try to prevent it, even starting by changing society for the better? Reich pointed out that yes, the drives of people as they are now do indeed need to be restricted, or they would be destructive. But that's only because through the restriction, the natural drives have become perverted. You can think of a river and someone building a dam in that river, damming that river until it turns into a great lake. And now, if I said, well, reason tells me that the river should not be dammed, that the river should flow freely. Imagine the people who erected the dam now saying, oh, you are naive, that cannot work, that is against the nature of the river. If you take the dam away, there will be a big wave and everything will be flooded and everyone will drown. Which is true, yes. But it is only true because you erected the dam in the first place, right? If you had never erected a dam, the river would probably flow slowly and gently, and it would probably be a small river. Only because you blocked it, did so much water start to pile up that now, if we just carelessly and recklessly took away the blocking, all the water would come crashing over us in a big wave. So now we have to think about how we can build back the dam slowly, how we can let the water flow further slowly. But had there been no dam in the first place, then there would also probably be no problem. And here's precisely the point where you get the conflict between the philosophical faculty and the juridical faculty. Now, at Kant's time, the universities were made up of 4 faculties. There were the 3 higher faculties, the faculty of theology, the faculty of law, and the faculty of medicine. And there was the lower faculty, that is the faculty of philosophy, which at the time included not just philosophy in a more narrow sense, but everything else, including natural science or study of poetry or whatever. And Kant said that there is a point of conflict or of contention between this lower philosophical faculty and the three higher faculties, especially with the faculty of theology and the faculty of law, maybe less so the faculty of medicine. But all three, because back then you would first study philosophy and probably do your master's or magister in philosophy, and then you would go on to join one of the higher faculties, maybe become a doctor in them, and they would prepare you for a specific work, a specific function in the state, right? The theological faculty would turn you into a priest, the medical faculty would turn you into a physician, and the faculty of law did not simply make lawyers or judges, but rather everyone who wanted to be part of the state apparatus, who wanted to be an official in the state, and the state's bureaucracy, probably would study law. And these three practical faculties would maybe look down on the, in their mind, maybe more useless philosophical faculty. And I already gave a lecture about this conflict between the philosopher and the higher faculties, and I very much recommend to check it out. I would say it's one of my more important lectures in this series of lectures on Kant, because my thesis is that through the lens of this conflict of faculties and what Kant has to say about it, we can understand how Kant understood himself as a philosopher and what his philosophical project was. And so therefore the conflict of faculties is a main key to understanding Kant's whole philosophy. But here, this is about the faculty of law and its conflict with philosophy. Kant would say that the philosopher wants to be a moral politician. That is, he wants to conduct politics in a moral way. While on the other hand, the jurist, so the member of the faculty of law, and again, that's not just a lawyer in Kant's time, that's basically anyone in the state bureaucracy, that's all the politicians in Kant's day. He is not a moral politician, but rather he is a political moralist. That is, while the philosopher wants to conduct politics in the way morality demands, the jurist, the political moralist, wants to create a morality according to the demands of politics. So he wants to do what is called real politics. He wants to be pragmatic in politics, and then he will twist and tweak morality to fit that. He will claim that this is morally all right because maybe it's the only way to do things and it's necessary and so on. And so this is precisely the conflict. The conflict is what comes first. I already said in earlier lectures that the motto, so to say, of the philosopher is always fiat justitia et pereat mundus. So let there be justice even if the world may perish over it. Which means for politics that politics has to try to realize justice and mustn't itself be unjust. Well, the jurist, the common politician, the political moralist, would probably follow the opposite statement and say fiat mundus et pereat justitia. So let there be the world, that is, let there be our state, let there be our welfare, our benefit, even if justice perishes over it. this is the meaning of the term reason of state, right? The reason of state is an instance where allegedly it is okay, it is even necessary to commit an injustice, that is to violate the right, because the so-called reason of state demands it, because it is necessary for the survival of the state, right? So maybe in older times, there might be someone with a claim to the throne, like the old king's brother has taken over, but maybe there's still some bastard son of the old king that might also have a claim. And so now you get rid of him, you maybe kill him, right? And this is not moral, this is not just, this is not the right thing to do. But these pragmatic politicians would say the reason of state demands it. It is necessary for the state's survival and stability, because otherwise there might be uprisings and civil war and so on, right? And this is also something happening in our present days. So, for example, in Israel, the father of the current president Herzog, who was also president at his time, pardoned members of the security service who were accused of having killed without any process prisoners accused of terrorism, and he pardoned them, as he said, because if they got a process and if they were convicted, it would tear Israeli society apart, which might have been true or untrue, but basically his statement was, let there be the world, that is, let there be Israel, even if justice perishes over it, right? His statement basically was, the reason of state demands that these people, even though they might be guilty, be pardoned. The reason of state demands that we don't do justice. And since I'm talking about this, I will point out that particularly here in Germany, the term reason of state, or Staatsräson in German, which is not used as much anymore nowadays, it might have been in Kant's days, has had a sort of comeback since about 2 decades ago. Chancellor Merkel used it, and Merkel said that the security of Israel is Germany's reason of state. Now, I don't think that she meant to say what she actually said, because Merkel was a very uneducated person, which is true for basically all our politicians nowadays. They are usually very uneducated people. Of course, not just the politicians. We live in times where education is very shallow in general. So I don't think that Merkel really know what reason of state means. I think when she said that Israel's security is Germany's reason of state, what she wanted to say is, this is something that is very important and very dear to Germany, and this is something that is a principle of German politics. That's probably what she meant by the word. I don't think she was aware what the word actually means, but accidentally she said the truth. Again, reason of state means for the state's survival, so for pragmatic reasons, for reasons of prudence, because happiness is more important to us than justice. For the state's survival, we are ready to violate the right. And I think that is quite true in this case. Clearly, Germany supporting Israel is indeed the reason of state. It is not for Israel's sake. It is not for the Jews' sake, even if Germany may claim that. I mean, for Israel's sake, nowadays you would protest against Israel and boycott Israel, right? Just like a true friend does not let his friend drive drunk, but rather would take the alcohol away from his friend, which the Israeli activist Yehuda Shaul has said, for example, and has asked Germany to do. So clearly, this is not for Israel's sake. This is for our sake. This is for Germany's sake. It's all PR. It's publicity. Germany, after the Second World War, after the genocide it committed against the Jews, of course, the other genocides don't matter. The genocide against the Roma people, against the Gypsies, or the genocide committed earlier, not by the Nazis, but by the German Empire against the Herero and Nama people in Namibia. Fuck those, that doesn't matter in the German mind. But the genocide against the Jews and the Second World War, there needed to be some sort of rehabilitation. And so, and this is not something that Merkel came up with. Already Konrad Adenauer, our very first chancellor after the Second World War, very openly said that we are now supporting Israel to be accepted back into the global community, basically. So yes, this is indeed Germany's reason of state. We are ready to violate the right to do what is unjust for our own survival. That is, for the image we want to project into the world, for pretending that we learned from our past. I mean, ironically, by doing that, we are exactly showing that we didn't learn from our past. And to anyone who really looked, this was clear for years and for decades. I'm quite glad, and that is one of the few good things that are coming out of these terrible past 2 years. I'm quite glad that now the world is starting to catch on, and now this image that Germany is trying to project doesn't work anymore. Because if you think about it, this is the politics of the Nazis. You could say that the Nazis just took the stance of what Kant calls the political moralist, the stance of the faculty of law. That is this stance, fiat mundus et pereat justitia, this stance that for the reason of state you can break with the law, you can do what is unjust. And the Nazis just brought that to its logical conclusion, saying, okay, justice doesn't matter at all. It's not just that sometimes we can do an injustice for our benefit, but rather it is only our benefit that matters. It is only the benefit of the German people or of the Aryan race, and justice doesn't matter. We can exterminate other races that are in our way. We can conquer territories so that we have living space in the East. Justice doesn't matter. So I would say if we had really learned from our past here in Germany, then the lesson would not be, okay, the Nazis had the wrong reason of state, we need another one. Or, okay, the Nazis were a bit too extreme in saying it is only our own welfare that matters and justice doesn't matter at all. We should go back to the old politics that said, okay, let's be a bit just, but not too just. Let's sometimes break with justice for our welfare. But rather, the real lesson should have been to answer this extreme of the Nazis with the opposite extreme. To say, okay, the Nazis said only our welfare matters, justice doesn't matter at all. We should say only justice matters. Our welfare doesn't matter at all. So we should say there cannot be a reason of state. Which is indeed what our constitution says, right? Our constitution that was created after the Second World War starts in its first article with saying that human dignity cannot be harmed. It does not say, oh yeah, for the reason of state, for the survival of Germany, or for the welfare of Germany and its people, it is sometimes okay to harm human dignity. No, it says human dignity must not be harmed. Not of anyone. It does not say, oh yeah, the human dignity of the Palestinians can be sacrificed if Germany, for its image in the global community, needs to support Israel. No. It says human dignity is supreme. If we had really learned, we would follow our constitution, but the German constitution is basically worthless. No one follows it, and a politician who was to seriously demand that we follow it would be smeared and torn apart in the public debates, and no one would vote for him. This is what Kant has to say. But nowadays it's hard to talk about this conflict between the philosophical and the juridical faculty, about the conflict between the moral politician and the political moralist, about the conflict between states' right and states' prudence, because most people are very, very firmly in the second camp. And they are so in a completely ideological and dogmatic matter that prevents them from even discussing their position. So nowadays, if you say we should not, in politics, first of all be prudent, we should first of all be just, then the answer that most people will give you is, oh, but that's not prudent. When you tell them the highest good in politics should be justice and not our benefit, they will say, oh, but justice will not benefit us. And that is obviously a very stupid reply that betrays these people unaufklärdness. Because if you have a debate, there can be one of two possibilities. Often, both people that are debating share the same principles, and they are just disagreeing about how to apply those principles, right? So two people could both say the most important thing in politics is the public welfare, and it is fine to do something that is unjust if it benefits our welfare. But they could disagree about what is the most prudent course of action. That is, what does benefit our welfare. And likewise, two people could both say what matters most is justice, and we mustn't do something unjust, even if it does benefit our welfare. But they could disagree on what is just. But there's also the other possibility that you have a debate where two people have two entirely different principles. And in such a case, it makes no sense to judge the other position based on your principle, because it is precisely your principle which is in question, right? So yes, if I say we should do what is just, even if it does not benefit us, then someone else can reply, oh, but that doesn't benefit us, that is not prudent. But that's not gonna convince me, because my whole point is that our benefit and that acting prudent is not what matters most. I mean, just as well, the other person could say, we should do what is most prudent, we should seek our own benefit, even at the cost of justice. And I could reply to that, I could criticize that, saying, oh, but that is unjust. That would be equally stupid as a reply, because here the other person could equally shrug his shoulders and say, okay, maybe it is, but I just said that to me justice is not the most important thing. To me, prudence is the most important thing. So the only way you can have a debate, if you don't disagree about how to apply a principle, but rather you disagree about principles as such, is if you are willing and able to abstract from your own principle and to assume a sort of third, higher position from which you have an overview over both principles. But that is something that unaufklärt people, that is something that dogmatic, ideologically stuck people cannot do. They are so much imprisoned by their own principles, by their own opinions. It's not just that they are not willing to give them up, to question them even. They cannot even for a second abstract from them and even hypothetically give them up. Now, where Kant stands in this conflict should not surprise you if you have already listened to my previous lecture on Kant's ethics, on Kant's moral philosophy. Because here, when it comes to right, when it comes to justice, his position is, of course, the same. That is saying you don't have to deny your happiness. It is not that it is not permitted to seek happiness. Kant is against what he calls the morality of monks, or ethica morosa, morality that demands complete self-denial and asceticism. No, he would say you can, that is permitted, you can seek your happiness, and that goes also for the state. The state can seek its own welfare, but only by morally permitted means, not by immoral means, not by violating the right. You can seek your happiness within the bounds the right sets, but you cannot go beyond those bounds. And I said it in earlier lectures, this statement, fiat mundus et pereat justitia, so the world, my own benefit, is more important to me, and if it comes down to that, I'm ready to sacrifice justice for it. If that is your motto, then you already are evil. You don't need to commit terrible acts to be evil. If this is your principle, you are maybe not by the degree of your actions, but by this general principle, as bad as the worst villain there is. Because that is what all evil is, right? It is fine to try to get money, but only through permitted means, not through theft. It is fine to try and have sex, but only through permitted means, not through rape. The moment you say, my benefit, that is me getting money or me getting sex, is more important even than the right, and I'm willing to violate rights for it, that is when you become evil. And so that should go for states too. The state mustn't say, my benefit, my welfare is more important than the right. Again, that's exactly what the Nazis said. I mean, if you read Hitler, his ideology in Mein Kampf or in his second book, he is basically saying, for one, okay, the Germans are a people without space, they need living space to survive, so we need to conquer the fertile land of Ukraine. But on top of that, Hitler even said it's not just about mere survival, it's about the good life, it's about luxury. he openly said we need to have the best possible life that you can have on Earth with the current technology. So it's not enough that people have a decent life, that everyone is well fed, no one is going hungry, everyone has a roof over his head. No, no. If the German housewife hears about the living standard of the American housewife being greater than hers, then even if her life as such is good, from that moment on it is not good anymore. From that moment on, she can no longer be satisfied. Um, she will now want the same living standard, right? Um, sure, you can maybe lead a good life, cleaning with a broom. People have done that for millennia without feeling bad. But the moment the housewife in Germany hears that the housewife in America has a vacuum cleaner, she will no longer be satisfied with her broom. She will need one too. And so Hitler said, in order to have the highest possible living standard, in order to have this luxury, it is okay to kill millions of other people. And now, since Aufklärung is about self criticism, ask yourself critically if our current mentality is really so different from that. I mean, here in Germany, people still want to have the highest possible living standard you can have on Earth with the current technology. They are not willing to just be well fed and so on. They want all the luxury there is to be had. All our politicians talk about is our welfare, our wealth, our living standard. And we are still willing to kill people for that. Sure, we might not do it ourselves anymore, go there with our armies and directly kill people, but we are willing to take part in exploitation. We are willing to make deals to trade with despotic regimes, be it China, be it Muscovy. There we very, very, very reluctantly chose to not trade so much anymore. Be it the Emirates, be it Saudi Arabia. There's blood on our smartphones. There's blood on our clothing, and everyone knows it. And we are perfectly fine with it. So really, we might have become a bit smarter than the Nazis, not committing to a war anymore, sort of outsourcing the killing and the enslaving, but the general principle is still the same and cannot be another one in a capitalistic society. So it is still that in our politics we put our own benefit about justice, and that alone, once again, that alone is evil. I mean, where do you want to draw the line? How can you say that in some cases this principle is okay and in others is not? I mean, how can we criticize the Nazis for killing other people, for their welfare, for their luxury, if we are doing the same? Is it really so different just because we don't kill them directly? Or, I mean, how can you criticize China for committing genocide against the Uyghur people? They say it is necessary for our security. They are threatening the security and integrity of China. Well, we here might not commit a genocide, but we are letting refugees drown in the Mediterranean, or we are deporting refugees back to a country like Afghanistan, where they will probably be killed or tortured. Also in the name of our security. Now, some people might argue that the Chinese misapply the principle, that they are wrong in thinking the Uyghurs are a security threat. Well, some people might also say that we are wrong thinking the refugees are a security threat. But is that really your only criticism? That the principle that says it is fine to commit injustice, to murder for your own benefit, for your own security, is just misapplied here, but not that the principle as such is wrong? If you do have that principle, even genocide is permitted in certain situations. I mean, the Israelis just showed us that. They have the very same principle. They also say, well, our security, our welfare, our continued existence as a Jewish state is more important than justice. You cannot possibly criticize that unless you commit to the opposing principle. Differences of degree don't matter if you have the same basic principle. And in passing, I want to point out two things here. The first is it turned out that the Nazis saying the Germans are people without space, we need to conquer living space in the East or otherwise we will be destroyed, that those were propaganda lies. I mean, Germany nowadays has more inhabitants than it did at the time of the Nazis, while at the same time, thanks to the Nazis and the war they started and lost, having less space. And still, we are doing quite fine. I mean, certainly there are some problems, but they have nothing to do with living space. So it turns out, almost 100 years later, that this was completely wrong, that this was just a propaganda lie. Likewise, for years, we have been told that we need to support despotic regimes in the Middle East, like the Assad regime, like the Gaddafi regime, like the regime in Saudi Arabia or in the Emirates that we are still supporting, because they are necessary for the stability of the region. And because without them, so-called Islamists will take over. Well, it has long turned out that it is precisely this unjust politics that has led to the instability of the region, that has led to people protesting, starting revolutions that turned into civil wars in Syria, or that has led to the rise to something like Daesh, or in Iran. If we, the West, had not supported the regime of the Shah, there would probably not have been the revolution that led to the regime of the Ayatollahs. So it always turns out after a while that this is just propaganda and lies. That whenever somebody says the most prudent course of action is to do an injustice, because if we don't violate the right here, then we will have problems. It always turns out that this is not true. That we could have actually stuck to what is right, and we wouldn't have had such problems. But the problem is that people don't seem to learn from that. People still fall for the same argument, for someone threatening them with losing their benefits, losing their welfare, losing their economic benefits if they don't violate rights. People never say, well, in the past this turned out to be wrong, maybe it's wrong again. No, still people get told, oh, if we commit to truly saving the climate, to truly becoming climate neutral, this will destroy our economy. Or people will still be told, oh no, we need to trade with China, or we need to buy resources from Arab despots. Otherwise, our living standard would break down. Well, I ask, are you so sure that looking back in 100 years, your descendants won't say that turned out that it is perfectly possible to live and to live a good life by producing goods yourself instead of having them produced in China? The second remark I want to make is that for a while now, at least since the first election of Trump 10 years ago, for a while now, I see the center, the liberals, the ausgeklärt humanistic people being increasingly shocked and increasingly frightened with the rise of the right in many Western countries. But this has never led them to any self-criticism. And what I can tell them is that they themselves have facilitated the rise of the right. That it is their own ideology, their political moralism. They are saying, for the reason of state, for our benefit, it is fine to do an injustice, that has led to the rise of the right. And this is not a new phenomenon. This is something that already Hannah Arendt described. She said that at the start of imperialism, which then later leads to totalitarianism, there's the mob. The mob is the people in this capitalist bourgeois society that don't have a place in that society and that are driven by resentment towards that society and its hypocrisy. Because the mob has seen through that society. The mob, having been raised and socialized by that same capitalist society, where only your own benefit matters and justice doesn't, actually shares these values, shares these principles, but what it does not share is the hypocrisy, is the pretense of that society. It wants to be openly selfish, and it hates and it resents that society for being selfish while doing it behind a facade of humanism. And so here, when the mob rules, when the right-wingers rise to power, all this is the same politics we always had, but without holding back and without pretending anymore, with the humanistic facade stripped away. I mean, the political personnel might be different. There might be different individuals. And sure, the behavior is different. If you compare someone like Trump with someone like Biden or Obama, sure, the latter ones showed a bit more decorum, a bit more decency in their outer conduct. But if you really look inside at the driving principle, is it so different? I mean, I hear people complaining that Trump openly says America first. I ask you, was that not the motto of every American president? I mean, did any president ever put justice first, put the global community first? Was Biden or Obama not doing a politics that mostly was meant to benefit America? Or I hear people complaining that Trump chose to rename the Department of Defense into the Department of War. I ask, was it ever anything else? I mean, the wars in Iraq or Afghanistan or in Vietnam, were they defensive wars? It was always the Department of War. Trump is just being more honest. This is what I always find so ironic. People complain that Trump is this big liar, the president that tells the most lies. If you ask me, he's the most honest president that has been in a very long time in the US. And that is something you can find in all countries where the right is on the rise. I mean, look at Israel, where since the beginning of this century, or you could go even further back, you could say since the 70s, the right has on the rise, and at least since the beginning of this century, the right has had total hegemony. But here too, I ask you, were the previous center or center left politicians so different in principle? I mean, they too were racist. They too supported apartheid. They too supported settler colonialism. They too never wanted to see eye to eye with the Palestinians and create true justice. I mean, even the social democrat Rabin, who by liberals often gets lauded as the one good prime minister, the one with whom Israel had a chance to peace, and if only he hadn't been shot, then everything could have been better. I mean, Rabin is the guy who, when there was the first Intifada, said when Palestinians are protesting and throwing stones, Israeli soldiers should break their bones, should break their arms and legs. And Rabin made it very clear that he did not intend for the Palestinians to have their own fully sovereign state. Sure, they should have some autonomy, but something beneath the level of statehood. So the principle has always been there cannot be equality. It's just that the current right-wingers are more honest about it. And that is the problem. For many, many years and decades, all politics in basically all Western countries has been about selfish interests of the people. All politics has been about, let's make sure our economy runs, let's make sure we have a life in luxury. Let's not care about justice. Let's not care about other people potentially getting hurt for our lifestyle. And politicians for decades have educated their people with this ideology. Your selfish needs and desires are all that matters, and we, the politicians, are not there to make states more just, to realize the ideal of justice, but rather we, the politicians, are there to serve your selfish interests. We are there to deliver whatever you order from us. Well, if you spend decades indoctrinating people with that, in order to then get voted in order to win elections with that, you should not be surprised if eventually the people take up that principle and want to be more consistent and more extreme than you have to offer them. If eventually the people say, well, if only our interests matter and justice doesn't, why should we go for the politicians that still at least somewhat pretend to also care about justice? Why should we not go for the less hypocritical politicians that openly say that it's just about our self-interest? So, I mean, right, in Israel, the people will say, well, we have tried being racist, being an apartheid regime that still gives the Palestinians some small freedoms and some small rights. Clearly that does not work out because the Palestinians don't want that. They want full equality, full rights. So why not try being a full-on apartheid regime? Why not try committing genocide? In other words, why not support the right-wingers? And so the only answer to that would be to offer the people a true alternative. The only answer to radical self-interest would be a politics of radical justice. But whatever our center or even center-left politicians are offering, a politics of self-interest, but with a little justice, not complete extreme and unlimited self-interest, but restricted by a small pretense of justice. That's over. No one is gonna go for that anymore. But they seem not to learn from that. But going back to Kant himself, he quotes Jesus in saying that we should be harmless as the doves, while at the same time being wise as the serpents. This is to mean that Kant is not against the state prudence. Kant is not saying you mustn't ever be prudent in politics. You mustn't ever do what would benefit you. He's just saying that the state's right should come first and the state's prudence should serve it. So, in other words, the prudence and the common welfare that it tries to arrive at should be a means to a higher purpose, but we should not be under the delusion that it is itself the highest purpose. In fact, that is what Aufklärung means to Kant, which I will explain when I get to his thoughts on Aufklärung, on so-called enlightenment. It means getting rid of delusions, and delusion in turn means confusing what is just a means for an end in itself. So Kant says, yes, politics should be prudent, but in the service of the right. He even says that in trying to realize justice, we should also be prudent, which can include not realizing it right away and all at once. Kant would say that reason permits us to take our time if needed. So, to take one example by Kant himself, he was a Republican. He ideally wanted a republic, not the absolute monarchies of his time. But he did say that if your state is surrounded by a bunch of other states that would like to conquer you, it can indeed be helpful to have one guy in charge to defend the whole instead of a bunch of people squabbling. And so if trying to get rid of the absolute monarchy, trying to get a republic would lead to the state just being conquered by others, then you can, for a time, keep the monarch in charge. The monarch doesn't have to just abdicate right away. It's just that the goal of the prudent politics in the end should always be the realization of justice. And this is important for me to stress, because this is also true when I say we should save the climate. This doesn't mean that right away tomorrow all cars should be prohibited. It should be prohibited tomorrow to drive a car. Of course, you can be a bit more prudent about that. You could start out creating alternatives, building up public transport. And likewise, when I say we shouldn't trade with a despotic state like China, of course, if tomorrow we stopped all trade with China, our economy would break down completely. Of course, that would not be prudent. So even though China is despotic, even though China is oppressing Hong Kong and Tibet and the Uyghurs and of course its own people and committing not just one genocide, but to my knowledge, it's the only country right now that commits more than one genocide, because it's committing genocide against the Uyghurs, but also against the Tibetan people. Still, we can of course not halt all trade with China just from one day to the next. But we could try to get there. We could try to step by step become more independent, so that soon enough we can stop trading with China. So the point is that Kant says we can wait with the realization of the right for a while if necessary, if trying to realize it right away would not be prudent, but we must not postpone it forever. We must not, under the guise of this being the most prudent course of action, not even try to realize the right. No, we should try, and all politics should be about that, to try and realize the right as fast as possible without harming ourselves. So you could say this is like if you are driving a car and you are trying to get somewhere, to the destination A. You don't necessarily have to drive as fast as possible in straight direction to the destination A, because maybe between you and A there's a wall and you would just be driving into the wall and crashing your car. So it might be more prudent to take some sort of way that would take a little longer because you have to drive some curves, but your goal should still be the destination A and to get there as fast as possible. You should not, with the argument that you cannot drive in a straight line because there's a wall, abandon driving to the point A altogether and instead drive to B or C. No, the goal should be justice, but the way we get there, that can be done in a prudent manner. And now, before closing off, I just want to point out that Kant himself tends to go a bit far with his principle, with saying that politics should be not about the state's prudence, but about the state right, saying that what matters is public justice, not public welfare. Because Kant is still a man of the 18th century, that is, he is still approaching the state from too much of an individualistic point of view, and therefore arriving at too much of a liberal position. Because Kant, in its notes, for example, he even says at some point that even running schools should not be done by the state but through private donations, or that even caring for the poor is not the job of the state. The state just has to protect everyone's property, and caring for the poor would have to be done by private individuals out of goodwill donating. Here you would have to go to Fichte, who came after Kant, and who had a more holistic, more social view. Because I think the issue here is not with Kant's principle, saying that what matters is justice and not welfare. The issue is just with how Kant applies this principle. Because Fichte would say, well, the school, it's not just a matter of welfare, of personal benefit for the students who get to go to school, but rather it is a matter of justice. If you don't get educated, if you don't get to learn equally like everyone else in the state, you are deprived of what is yours. And likewise, Fichte would say, well, sure, the state should protect property, but really justice is about everyone having what is his, right? As Kant himself says, the principle is suum quique tribui, give to each his own. Well, Fichte would say, if someone is too poor to live, if someone is maybe homeless, that in itself is already an injustice. Even if you cannot point at a specific person that stole that guy's property, still it is society as such that stole from him. everyone must have the property to be able to live a proper, dignified life. So yes, the state would have to give back to the poor person money from the less poor people that the state acquired through taxes, to create true justice. So Fichte would go even further and say that in a truly just state, there wouldn't be poor people requiring welfare in the first place. Something is probably already going wrong if that is needed. But again, I think we don't need to overstress these issues in Kant's writings, because, as I said, the issue is not with his principle, but just with how he applies the principle. And Kant himself, in the very same note where he talks about the schools or about the charity for the poor, Kant himself does note that the state can take care of the people's welfare also, as long as that is not treated as the end in itself, as the actual purpose of the state, but rather as a means to the purpose of justice. Because Kant does point out that a state where the welfare is not taken care of, where people are poor, then the justice and the rights of the people will probably also be threatened, right? Like, if people are poor, maybe they might steal. So caring for the welfare is not just prudent, it's not just benefiting people's happiness, but also creates a situation where true justice can exist, while otherwise a state where the people cannot live, that state's laws, that state's constitution will probably also break down. So the point is not that the state must never care for the welfare of the people. The point is just that this should not be the highest goal for which we sacrifice justice, but rather it should be the other way around. Justice should be the highest goal of politics. My deep thanks be to my supporters: Leo Allmann, Thomas Deuringer, Gernot Klaufen, Benjamin Lehning, Ökobong, Alexander Reuter, Lisa Rinner, Ron Suhl, as well as to all others who support me and my aufkläring cause.